Let me give a short rundown where we stand in our world and what directions we should choose. First, we are at historical crossroads. So is one post sign which directs us into what we called to continue the way of what some people call neoliberalism, global cooperation, but we face the backlash of millions of people, particularly in the West, who feel that globalization is not working at their advantage. And then you have the other post sign, the other roadmap, which leads into the re-erecting of walls, into probably a world which is more anchored in yesterday, and a world which probably is characterized by fragility and hostility. I would suggest that we do not choose either of those two ways, but that we construct a new way, which is in line with the new world which is unfolding. We should not argue in the context of yesterday. We should really first analyze how the world has dramatically changed and is changing in an accelerating way. But before doing so, we should not forget the great benefits globalization has brought to mankind. 1 billion people have been lifted out of poverty. Our age expectations has increased substantially. As consumers, we have benefited from lower prices enabled by global supply chains. And I could go on and on. But also we should be aware that globalization has created a new economic equation. Skills, labor is less in demand, which means if we look at the pie of GDP, the rent for labor is lower, and those who have capital, those who have new ideas, have benefited more from globalization. And for this reason, what we have seen in the elections in the United States, in the Brexit vote, this anger of people against globalization and against the elites, which they feel have profited from globalization. There's another change, probably more dramatic, affecting our lives. And we mentioned it last year and 2 years ago. It's the fourth industrial revolution. Many things which I described in a book which was published 1 year ago and which were looked at like science fiction have become reality. And this country, Dubai, has been at the forefront, has had the mindset to really recognize the future. Congratulations. But the fourth industrial revolution will change our lives, will change how we live, how we consume, how we work, in even more dramatic ways compared to what we have seen. Last year, we were particularly captured, and 2 years ago, by drones, by self-driving cars. Now, artificial intelligence, new methods to manipulate genes are not anymore ideas, but they have become reality. Now, if we take all those changes, and I would like to add another change, a more political change. The world has moved from a unipolar power structure to a multi-power structure. And it's not only moving from one power to more powers, but it's also to moving from one concept, the Western concept, to many different ideas how nations and global affairs should be managed. Now, what is the impact? I would argue that many people with the fast change, which they cannot anymore digest, and the complexity of the world, many people are going through an identity crisis. They ask themselves, what is the purpose of my life in such a world? What is the purpose if I'm a worker somewhere in mid-America and I have to be afraid of my workplace? So it's this new class, you may have heard about it, which is called the Precariat. People who feel in a precarious situation, who do not know whether they have enough when they get older, whether they can pay their medical bills. Now, how can we address those issues? And I would like to propose maybe 9 to 10 new paradigms. We do not know how the world really will look like. We know we are in a very emotionalized way. So there's an emotional turmoil in the world. People in some parts of the world are angry. Facts do not anymore count. Fake news may become more important than realities. So how do we address this situation? Let me propose those 9 to 10 dimensions. The first one is we should not go back just to the old system of neoliberalism and to say we want to fix the system by making it more inclusive. No. If you look what's happening in the United States, particularly, you have this anti-system movement. What we are seeing is a revolution against the system. So fixing the present system is not enough. Now, there is, of course, an anti-system, which is called libertarianism, which means to tear down everything which creates some kind of influence of government into private lives. It's dismantling the system, and we see certain elements of this now in the new US administration. Now, if we want to go forward, we need a completely new thinking, where the human being is again at the center. And societal advancement is at the center. And Prime Minister, and also Dubai, and if I look at the program, the notion of happiness, of well-being, but well-being compared with purpose and with engagement, I think should be at the center of our future policies. That's one area. Another element for the future is that we should prepare ourselves for the fourth industrial revolution in a way where we look at this revolution as an opportunity. Mankind, humankind, has now the capability to elevate itself on a higher level. Artificial intelligence is not just a threat for humankind. Artificial intelligence could allow us to humanize robotization and not the contrary. So we have all the means in our hands, partially offered by the fourth industrial revolution. But in order to do so, we need to move out from this negativism which you see now in many parts of the world, of this fear of the future, into a situation where we again have trust into the future. And that's when I'm coming to Dubai, it's so refreshing because you feel you are at a place which still looks with great optimism and in a constructive mind at the future. Another element which we have to integrate into our future policy making is the notion of multi-stakeholder concept. This is the notion on which the forum is built. The big challenges which we have cannot be solved by governments alone, but they cannot be solved by business or civil society alone. We need new ways of cooperation, of very flexible cooperation. One other issue, one other element is that we should not look at a contradiction of nationalism and globalism. We are a global community with joint destiny, and there are many issues which could bring humankind down. Nuclear weapons, epidemics, the environment. So we have to work together to address those issues. But at the same moment, we need a home. We also need a national identity. So it's not a national identity versus a global identity. We as modern citizens, global citizens, we have to learn to integrate a national and a global identity. One other new paradigm for the future. I remember, I will share with you a small story. Many years ago, I was traveling with, who was at that time Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew, from Singapore to Beijing in his plane, and we talked about the difference of Western and Eastern philosophy. And he explained to me, look, you in the Western, based on the history, on enlightenment, you have a concept which protects the individual against the collective. We, based on Confucius, we have more a concept which protects the collective against the individual. Today, particularly at times when the individual could have so much power, we have to find a way to harmonize those two concepts. One other new paradigm for the future, which I want to mention, and particularly important for governments, is the principle of exploration, of subsidiarity, and of service. We cannot predict the future anymore, and we cannot construct in advance all the rules to regulate our national business and private lives. We have to explore the future, and we have to do it through collaborative, as I mentioned before, multi-stakeholder processes. And then after exploration comes subsidiarity. We should create rules only when it's absolutely necessary, and only at the level which is necessary. This is important for modern, sophisticated governance. And I would say one of the reasons why we have, let's call it, challenges in Europe was probably the fact that Europe was overruled with regulations, and therefore you had the negative reaction of its population. Now the second last point I want to make is the world which is now coming up seems to be a world which is not anymore based on values, on commonly shared values, but much more a world where you look for common interests. But that's not a stable base to secure peace and prosperity in the world. We need values, not just human rights, but human obligations. And this was actually here in Dubai when our, at that time, Global Agenda Council on Values elaborated 3 principles. If they would be observed, I think we would have much fewer problems in our world. 3 values which we all should practice and which governments should practice. Very simple. Number 1, respect human dignity and the diversity of humanity. Number 2, serve the community you belong to as much, or at least as much, as you serve your self-interests. And number 3, always feel to be a steward for your children and for the next generations. Through 3 simple values. But if we would all apply those values, I would look with great optimism at the future of the world. And the final word, a final paradigm, I think it was expressed in the theme of the annual meeting of the World Economic Forum 3 weeks ago in Davos: responsive and responsible leadership. If we want to be leaders in government, in business, or where else, we earn our mandate only if we are constantly acting with those who have entrusted us with leadership. If we have our fingers at the pulse. But that's not enough to be aware of what's happening, what the expectations are. At the end, you have to have the odyssey and the courage to lead, as it is the case in this country. To lead with vision and with determination and based on values. I wish you a very good World Government Summit. Thank you.